thanks for the invitation, and I understand Dr. Gossip wasn't feeling well today, but thank you as well, Ahmed, for the invitation this year. I had a chance to speak to a number of you just as we're kind of filling in, and you guys certainly have very diverse backgrounds, and of course, very relevant. You all have different career trajectories, but that's good to see. So let's start off light. Let's do a few fun slides, and then we'll kind of get into it. You know the score here. We have about 40 minutes of content time, so it's not like we're going into a great deal of depth. But with the 40 minutes of content time we have, we'll kind of touch on some key points. We'll break, and then we'll do some in-class exercise so we can kind of consolidate some of the highlights that you've been exposed to this evening, so you're actually able to do something when you leave the room, right, which is my goal. Interesting discussions are great, but I need my students to be enabled at the end of our chat. Okay, so let's why don't we just start at the beginning here. So I'm a big nerd, bigger these days, I think. So for a while there, William Shatner was following my Twitter feed, and for those of you who might know who that is, that's like Star Trek, the original Captain Kirk. So I was quite excited about that. I woke my wife up at 3 o'clock in the morning and said, William Shatner's following my Twitter feed. And of course, what I did was I screenshotted it and I sent pictures to faculty in biomedical engineering. And I said, you guys may have research grants, but I have William Shatner's Twitter follow. All right, so my Twitter account is for what's going on here? I'm not playing nicely today, sir. Claire, for some reason. Okay. All right, let's just see here. So just a little bit about my intellectual pedigree, which will be somewhat relevant here because it helps contextualize some of the things that I would say. So I guess I'm a homegrown boy to some extent. I did several years of research here in medical imaging at Sunnybrook Hospital. I also did worked at the Addiction Research Foundation, which merged with CAMH. I worked on alcohol abuse for a couple of years. It wasn't a degree. I was just employed there doing research, so it was great, right? I was being paid, and I was publishing. And then you know, your projector quality will vary, so the font isn't coming out too clearly on this, but it's workable. So I also did my master's degree on cocaine addiction and the neurobiology of it. For my PhD, I looked at sensory trauma, brain trauma. I was interested in testing some of the ideas that were foremost at the time in terms of neural networks and how the brain functions. So I was looking at interplay at different levels of sensory processing in the brain and how that changed response to injury. So I had a lot of fun with that. I finished my PhD in 2.5 years. The research I was doing really excited me, but at the same time, it was time to move on. So I went into. Are we okay there in feedback?
Yeah.
Okay. So I went into investment banking, kind of taking my scientific training and kind of applying it a different way. So I worked as a biotechnology analyst. I've used Wall Street here for kind of illustrative purposes. In Canada, the equivalent is Bay Street. So I was a biotechnology analyst and eventually a director for several years. And then my last kind of.
Your attention, please. Your attention, please. Code Brown, L. Lima Wing, room 29. Your attention, please. Your attention, please. Code Brown, L. Lima Wing, room 29.
So there was some fun time there. I had to give a talk one time in Toronto, and so my company flew me by helicopter to Toronto. and then of course, being a poor student most of my life, I'd never been to Europe. So my first trip to Europe was by private jet. So there are all kinds of stories that go with that. But yeah, I had no concept of what normal was. I went from cheese whiz and soda crackers to this lifestyle, like, you know, in a matter of like 18 months. So I had no concept of what a normal lifestyle was. I went from poor to completely the opposite. And then after that, kind of my last stint in private sector, I worked for a couple of pharma companies as a medical liaison. And so I worked with trauma. I worked with some inflammatory bowel disease conditions. So that's kind of shaped my perspective of kind of what I do. The key thing probably from your perspective, although I appreciate you can see it this way, is this. I've spent a lot of time going over early stage companies in Canada, specifically the United States, and lesser extent Europe. So my sole role is to do due diligence on new technology and to determine risk. Okay? Now that risk assessment is not what we're talking about today. What we're talking about is a much more specific form of risk assessment. Now we'll see if this plays nicely.
Your attention please, your attention please. Code Brown, L. Lima Wing Basement, room 29. Your attention please, your attention please. Code Brown, L. Lima Wing Basement, room 29.
We'll see if this plays nicely. This is just a short clip from a film called Gladiator. Our legionnaire has a shoulder injury from a sword. So if the display will show it clearly, I want you to look at how the wound was treated. Now we don't have sound.
Let's click the sound button on the computer.
Oh,
Try that.
let's see.
Meet them again. Not yet. No, they will clean it. Wait and see. Don't die. They'll feed you to the lions. They're worth more than we are. Better now. Clean. You see?
So kind of a little bit tricky to pick up with this, with our kind of our film play in this setting. But did you see how that wound was treated? What was done there?
Packing.
Sorry?
Packing.
True. And the latter step.
Maggots.
Yes, maggots. Right? Maggots. So maggots were used to kind of debride the wound of dead tissue. So I find it interesting in this context. Then maggots are considered a medical device, because despite the fact that maggots are, of course, organic and are living. To your point about the cleaning and the use of maggots, that action is mechanical. And because that action is mechanical, from a regulatory perspective, maggots would be seen as a medical device. Okay? Now, we're not talking about combination medical devices tonight, but this is kind of an interesting segue into the topic more broadly. I didn't realize it when I did this, but this title slide is a polemic. What is that? What is that? We have engineers, we have data scientists in the room, and I realize the labeling is not easy to make out, but you should be able to make this out a mile off.
Some sort of algorithm?
Some sort of algorithm,
Is it a
okay?
neural network?
A neural network,
Looks
getting,
like from obligation of silence.
Is that pipeline or something?
Transform.
okay. In my opinion, and Jayson Parker's opinion, if I was a young person today, I would make damn sure I knew exactly what this is.
Transform.
Transformer. Right? Your generation, ladies and gentlemen, this is my message to all young people, graduate students and undergraduate. It's incumbent on all of you to get familiar with the transformer model. You decide in what manner is appropriate. For some of you who are more adept technically, you may try to code. And for the rest of us, and I'm not adept technically, there are plenty of YouTube videos out there that explain the basic architecture of the transformer model. Okay? This, in my opinion, is the defining technology of your generation. Having said that, the polemic is that technology like this, artificial intelligence, yes, but technology like this, it's gonna find its way into our healthcare system. It's going to happen, just like, and even though I'm out of power, my smartphone found its way, our smartphones found its way into our healthcare system. Artificial intelligence is going to become part of healthcare. The question we have to ask ourselves is, how do we prepare for it? And when I look at kind of the thinking that a lot of people are sort of engaging in with regulation right now, we aren't prepared for it. And so we're going to talk about the kind of thinking in a regulatory context that prepares us not just to start thinking about how AI can be responsibly and safely integrated in our healthcare system, but innovation more broadly. So when we're working on regulatory context, there's two situations broadly we need to think about. So we have a new product, and this new product may conform to existing regulatory precedent. So by that I mean, you're looking at a new product and you say, I don't know, I'm not familiar with this. I go through this routinely. Like when I was in investment banking, I was confronted with new products multiple times a day. It's not like I got 2 months to research one product and then move on. Quite the opposite. So I would be exposed to multiple technologies per day. So I had to move quickly. So this is the most common scenario. And it's not even the most common scenario based on my experience. It's the most common scenario based on how I see young people conduct themselves. Okay? So the way I find young people tend to conduct themselves is, this is what they expect. They're looking at a new technology, and the expectation is that, well, I may not be that familiar with the technology, but certainly I could find an example of something similar that is regulated by the U.S. Food and Drug Administration or Health Canada. And I use it as a guide based on similarity. And then we have this scenario. This is innovation. You're confronted with a new technology, and no, there is no precedent. There is nothing sufficiently similar you can look at as a guide. I'll borrow a line from a video game. I think it's from a video game. Ladies and gentlemen, you are not prepared. I don't know you specifically that well, but just in general, what I see on campus, okay? Our thinking is not there, okay? So this is really what we want to prepare ourselves. And don't get me wrong, you can have innovative technologies that have precedent, have similarity, that things have already been approved. Don't be wrong, and that happens frequently. But when you're talking about something like the transformer model, and you deploy that in healthcare, no. You are not going to find something that happens to be similar that was used in the past, and we can use that as a guide to how we should think about it now. We are going to be the first. You are going to be you're the young people shaping the landscape today. You are going to be the first. You're going to have to decide how to manage this situation. And I'm using the transformer model as an example, but it's only an example. Any dramatic innovation in technology is going to fall into this category. So a few highlights of medical device regulation. I focus on the US, since US is approximately 45% of global market share. So we have 3 risk classes, class 1, class 2, class 3. And so notionally, the idea behind risk classes is that it represents risk, right? But let's operationalize that. What does that really mean? Risk class represents the potential for injury to the patient should the device in question not work. So if we have a faulty Q-tip swab, chances are, like, it'd be super unlikely this would ever result in a hospital admission. So extremely unlikely. On the other hand, using this, there are many examples, but dental imaging. If you have faulty dental imaging equipment, chronic exposure to unsafe levels of energy over time can certainly be very dangerous for a patient. And then class 3, what's depicted here is a cardiac stent. I don't, especially for this audience, I don't think I need to describe what the ramifications are for a faulty cardiac stent. That is certainly life-threatening, and it can be immediately life-threatening, okay, post-operatively. So it's not like we're talking about 10-year follow-up here. So, and then Canada has class 4 and Europe has class 4, but I'll continue to focus on the US as our prime example here as a frame of reference. And so this is where I'm getting at. I see this disposition. It's not even a disposition, it's a default mode. So I teach, I'm Department of Biology, I teach for the Master of Biotechnology program. My focus is digital health technology students, but I also teach biomedical engineers. And I'll tell you, every student I work with, this is a battle. And here's the battle. I appreciate that young people are interested in innovation, but behavior has to match aspiration. Behavior has to match aspiration. In the end, right, we kind of draw conclusions about things by looking at behavior rather than statements. And a lot of people are conducting themselves like technicians. Technicians. And if you conduct yourself like a technician, you may not find yourself ready for the innovative technology you hope to be involved with. So what does it mean to be a technician? We already touched upon this. There's nothing wrong with technicians, but I don't think you've come this far in your career path because you want to be a technician. That's probably not why you're here. Nothing wrong with being a technician, but chances are that's not your goal. You're a technician when you take a new piece of technology and you say, you know what, I think it looks similar to this technology on the FDA website. They look similar, so I'll borrow. Right? If this technology looks similar to class 2, then this new technology must be class 2. That's the thinking. It's endemic across campus. Every young person that I encounter thinks this way. And you know what? You're going to be right most of the time until you aren't. And when is that situation when you're not going to be right? When you're dealing with the technology you've been dreaming about. When you finally get the chance to work on that truly innovative technology, and then you realize there is no precedent. There is no similarity. There is no example that we can work with in terms of prior approval history at Health Canada or the US Food and Drug Administration that guide us in our decision making. Now what do? This is the moment we all want, but this is the moment we're not preparing ourselves for. Okay. Sorry, I guess I pontificate sometimes, but this is very exciting. This is not a talk on AI. But I can tell you right now, we're not ready for this. The last time the FDA just released a document about 6 months ago. Its prior document that discussed artificial intelligence was before large language models. That's how far behind the game we are. And the FDA, I think most countries would agree explicitly or implicitly, is a default leading authority on regulation. So if the FDA is struggling to catch up here, I can guarantee you that every other regulatory agency around the world is much farther behind. Okay, so we don't want to behave like technicians. We want to behave like innovators. And if you're an innovator, in my opinion, you do 2 things. 1, absolutely, go ahead. I believe in smart work, not hard work. If you can find an example on the Health Canada or FDA website that's similar to the innovative product you're looking at, and you can use that similarity to your advantage so you can cut through the decisions, great. So go ahead and do that. But you're going to do one other thing, in my opinion. You're going to do your own work. And from what I see right now, this is not even an option for most people because they don't know what their own work would be. If I'm not going to follow the explicit rules of Health Canada or FDA, what does it mean to my own work? How can I challenge or guide or propose an alternative to Health Canada or the FDA? All of this comes down to one concept and one concept only: risk. That is the only concept that matters in the entire time that we spend together over the next 90 minutes or so. And for core students who have me for an entire course on this, we have an entire course on risk. Okay? For you guys, it's just one lecture, but for the students less fortunate who have me for an entire course, the entire course is about risk. Automated external defibrillator, class 3, highest risk class in the United States regulatory system. Cardiopulmonary bypass machine and accessories. So we open up the chest like a walnut, we break the sternum, the heart then is relieved of its functionality as we feed blood through the cardiopulmonary bypass machine. We risk thrombosis, we risk hemodynamic injury, we risk infection, we risk low pressure, just to name a few things off a long list of safety concerns. Question, is this a high-risk product? Yeah, I agree with you. I agree with you, this is a high-risk product. No, I agree with you, this is a high-risk product, and like you, I'm also wrong. Because currently, the FDA regulates that machine as a Class 2 device, not Class 3. So there's two ways we can conduct this discussion. We could enter the vernacular and say, are you kidding me? Does it make sense that this is a intermediate risk device? We could do that, we could have that conversation, but that's not a very scholarly conversation, it's not evidence-based. Or we can do analysis. We do analysis and we demonstrate quantitatively, we make the argument, no, this is not a Class 2 device, it's Class 3. And here's the analysis to show it. And that is a goal that we have tonight. What does that analysis look like? And what does it mean to analyze a medical device to even begin to formulate an argument about risk class or how the device should be regulated? Because in the end, right, when you look at Health Canada, you look at the FDA, and you look at the current regulations as they stand, it's all derived from risk analysis. Now, no disrespect to my clinical colleagues, but this slide typically will summarize everything a clinician will know about medical device regulation, if they even know this slide. And that's not a dig against clinicians, their curriculum is full as it is. But we have a problem right now. A lot of people have a workable familiarity with how drugs are regulated, but the vast majority of us have no idea how medical devices are regulated, and that's a problem. So, what's this? Here's another technology that's probably not gonna have a precedent. Elon Musk, Neuralink, right? If he gets Neuralink off the ground, he is not going to be able to operate the people who support this venture by simply finding something similar that has been approved in the past by the FDA. This is a new technology. There will not be a precedent. So again, we're going to have to do our own work to think about how this should really be regulated and what the risks really are. So classically then, in the United States, you know, and this slide, I said, will typically, for physicians who are familiar with medical device regulation, this slide will summarize typically what they're familiar with. So we have a new device that comes on, and again, the colors are not kind of washing out with this projector. But anyway, we have a new device that's on the market. And, you know, we do want to do a lot of the testing and so forth. We want, let's bubble up. Why even talk about regulation? What are the practical implications of talking about regulation? Why talk about it?
Market access,
Yeah, true. Market access, agreed.
human safety, patient.
Sorry?
Patient safety.
Yeah, patient safety. Patient safety. Let's put on our commercial hats. Okay, you're right. Okay, and that's certainly you're right. Ultimately, let's stick more to the business case. Yes, ma'am.
Mitigate risk and liability.
Okay, mitigate risk and liability. Okay, but you know, I don't get that excited thinking your company's exciting because you're less liable. Okay, yes, sir.
Reimbursement?
Reimbursement's a great answer. I mean, certainly the market access will go along with that. Absolutely, that's great. Yes, ma'am.
How hard of a test you have to do to prove that it's.
Oh, good. I like that. Okay, so let's just build on that. Cost. There's a direct cost and indirect cost. So one is the complexity of testing, and the second is how long it's going to take to bring to market. Right? This is really important to know. When you're modifying a medical device, oh my gosh, really? I'm going to have to conduct a clinical study? Oh. Maybe, you know, let's go back to the drawing board. Maybe I can come up with another design modification that isn't going to require a clinical study. Because a clinical study is definitely going to involve time, probably a minimum of 2 years, and it's going to involve costs. So you have the indirect cost of time and the direct cost to actually, you know, hire people, conduct the study, and so forth. So good comments on that. So we want to cut costs, certainly. You know, I know this doesn't go over so well, but ultimately most areas of medical devices are commodities, so margins are tight. So, so I have a new device here. If I can convince the FDA the device is sufficiently similar to something approved in the past, then I can, so this product that I say is similar, that the FDA approved in the past, we call a predicate. So identify a device approved in the recent past, and make the argument of similarity. The device I've identified is a predicate. If the FDA accepts the argument of similarity, then it will be deemed substantially equivalent. I put in all my courses, I put very little terminology in any of my courses. So if I mention a term, you need to know it. Okay. So substantially equivalent. On the bottom of my slides are the citations. So you can look up these citations as you see fit and pull up the appropriate documents. Scholarship. Citation has 2 dates. The first date is the date of the document. The second date is the date I access the document. Okay? Because we want to make sure that when we talk about regulation, if I'm citing a document in 2014, it hasn't been superseded by a document published in 2020. So if I say, oh yeah, I checked it last year. So that gives us a confidence that up until last year, there was no new document that superseded what I'm citing. Comment, question? Yeah.
For equivalence, can it be application equivalence or does it?
Oh, great thoughts, right? So how do we break this down? And we'll get to the next slide. So it's not too often you would say this in a talk. It kind of looks simple, but trust me, it's more complicated than it looks. Usually you'd say the reverse. Trust me, this is complicated. So basically with that, so what we're doing is we're going through, so substantial equivalence goes through what's called the 510K pathway in the United States. When you're using, and the majority, I can't give you a number on this, but the majority of products will enter the market through the 510K pathway as class 2 products. So we're going to take we'll take our new device and we can compare it to a predicate. Now, so Claire, I understand I gave a talk on this several years ago, and there's a video from a MedVentions talk online. What I'm saying tonight supersedes that video, because there are a few differences now. So we make this comparison. There's 2 questions we're going to ask ourselves. Is the design similar, and is the intended use similar? And the next slide, we're going to talk about what intended use is. Intended use is confusing. It's not well defined. For now, let's just take it as the English would suggest, but we'll talk about what intended use is in the next slide. So we ask, is the design similar? Is the intended use similar? And if the answer is yes and yes, we conclude it's substantially equivalent. Okay? But if there's any reason to believe that the design is not similar, or any reason to believe that the intended use is not similar, now we're analyzing risk. Now we're analyzing risk. It's a safety analysis, right? So for a safety analysis, it's really risk analysis. And the risk analysis we'll talk about is specifically hazard analysis. So we're not just talking about risk analysis as a big tent, we're talking about hazard analysis. Again, the supporting citations are on the slide. You guys can follow them up as appropriate. Some will be stronger than others. Okay, I'm going to talk about intended use in one slide. It's one lecture, guys. So intended use, in my experience, is something that's people new to this area take about 2 or 3 lectures to get comfortable with. Okay, so this is not something that is going to resonate easily. Okay. And the FDA has been criticized for this by the Institute of Medicine because it's a confusing concept. Intended use is not used in drug regulation. Intended use is not used in drug regulation. We have product labels for drugs. We have product labels for devices. We have indications for use for drugs. We have indications for use for devices. But intended use is a concept that is reserved for devices. And when I say devices, let's do our shells. Device, software, AI. So scalpel, what is the intended use? Well, so let's go with a general description of function. The intended use of scalpel is cut flesh. And right now, my company, you know, speaking figuratively, I'm not as brave as you guys are. I don't have a company. I've never tried to start one. I have an indication for cutting skin in the pelvic area. So this is my currently approved indication, cutting skin in the pelvic area. And so now I'm saying to the FDA, well, you know what? I cut skin in the pelvic area. I'd like to get an indication, approval, to also use my scalpel in facial reconstruction, cutting in the facial area. In terms of the plain English, it sounds the same. Cut flesh, cut flesh. Sounds the same. Now, this is the part students have a lot of trouble with, which means I don't do a very good job at communicating this. Whether or not the intended use has changed is not based on the English. Whether or not the intended use has changed is based on underlying risk. So if I'm cutting in the facial area, what new risks might emerge operatively that I'm not going to see in the pelvic area? Yes, sir.
Something like damaging the eyes?
Yeah, okay, fair enough. Proximity of organs, like the eyes, absolutely. Anything else? What other risks would be present cutting skin in the facial area that may not be present in the pelvic area?
More evident scars.
Yeah, okay, fair enough. There's certainly that scarring would certainly be much bigger issue in the facial area.
Nerve damage.
Nerve damage, absolutely. So the density of innervation is much, much higher in the facial area than it is in the pelvic area. So we can continue with this conversation. So anatomically, electrophysiologically, there are a lot of differences between the pelvic skin area, and also thickness of the skin. There's a lot of differences between the facial area and the pelvic area. So if we analyze the risks, we would conclude, you know what? If we go to the facial area, we are introducing new risks that are not present in the pelvic area. And when you are introducing new risks, or you're elevating existing risks, then you may have changed the intended use, even though the English behind the intended use has not changed. These are still both cut flesh, but they are not technically the same intended use, because if you analyze the risk behind these two, they're different. Not an easy concept, guys, okay? So the FDA has been criticized for this, and as I said, in my experience, you know, it takes students a couple of lectures to really start to get comfortable with this. So let's bring it back then to the five. Yes, sir.
Sorry, just a clarification. So in this example, are we saying we want to get approval for the scalpel in this new application?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
So we're currently approved in the pelvic area. So you know what? Let's add some more market share. Let's get approval for the facial area. Right. These are made up examples to show these concepts, but yeah. So current approval in the pelvic, we're looking to add the indication of facial.
Okay. So you, like in this example, like if for a more complicated device, you'd still have to submit a 501k, even if it's the same device that you're applying to a new application?
Yeah, you'd have to submit, there are different types of 510k, but you'd have to submit a 510k if you're changing it, absolutely, you're changing your product label, because now you're adding the facial area.
Okay, so the device doesn't have to change in order for that to happen. So like the device itself doesn't have to change?
No, that's right. So if the device changes, that's an added source of risk. But just taking the same existing device and now applying it in a different population. So there's two ways we can change a product label, you know, off the top of my head. One is we apply it to a new patient population. We don't change the device, we just apply it to a new patient population. That is going to give us new risks. But when we're talking about medical devices, we see something you don't see with a drug. And that is, even with the same patient population, I could change the anatomy of where I'm using the device, and that can create new risks. You don't see that concept with drugs, because drugs are given systemically, but because devices are focal and anatomically specific, within the same patient population, you can have changes. And I should have disclosed, this is a Harry Potter wand. It's purely ornamental. There's no risk of accidental discharge, so I don't want anybody to feel nervous. We were in Spain during the summer, and what are the odds? I found a nerd store in Spain, so they had all these Harry Potter ones, so I had to get one. Okay, not easy, guys. What I'm showing you is not easy. This is not an example of you catching up to everyone else. This is not easy. For high-risk products, class 3, And there are a lot of exceptions to what I'm saying. We're not getting into the exceptions because that becomes a course. But for a high-risk product, class 3, we're gonna use a pre-market approval application. And a pre-market approval application, a PMA, is antithetical to the medical device arena. Why? Because medical devices are famous for not using clinical data. Right? They're famous for that. There's no way you would ever get away with that in the drug world. It's just not going to happen. So in drugs, of course, you have clinical data. You always do. It's not something that's even negotiable. But in the medical device world, often you're not going to have clinical data. So for a lot of 510Ks are not going to have clinical data. A lot of 510Ks are not going to have clinical data. So this is a tricky question then, and it comes back to risk. You're working with a new product, and you ask yourself the following question: do I need clinical data as part of my submission? There's two ways of answering that. One, and we've already talked about it. One, you look at other devices that are similar on the FDA website that they have to submit clinical data. And if they did, chances are you do as well. And that's fine from the technician perspective. But if you're dealing with an innovative product that doesn't have any precedent, now you're gonna have to figure it out for yourself. Do I need to submit clinical data? And that answer will come in part from your risk analysis. Okay. Do we need to collect clinical data? Because you're gonna have to formulate that argument, right? You don't go to the FDA like your professor and say, what's the answer to this question? You want to, because they're gonna kind of default, if you will, they're a great group, but they're gonna kind of default to the most onerous requirements for your product. So you want to be prepared to formulate an argument about an appropriate strategy for your product that's safe for the public, that is not necessarily the most onerous requirements possible. So PMA approved, high-risk product. Any subsequent modifications to this are done through the PMA supplement. It's a much shorter, cheaper approval pathway. So the only time, so PMA, big changes, PMA supplement, small changes. And again, citations on the slide for you guys to look up the appropriate guidance documents. Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am, sorry.
What about the preclinical or bench testing for a medical device?
Sorry, what about the?
The preclinical, so to check it on human, we have to do the preclinical.
Right.
So like I worked with a device and like it was very hard to, like it was an innovative device, but it like it was usually mostly the use was dependent on the voluntary control of humans. So like we were very confused about do we need a bench testing or the preclinical or not?
Yeah, and that is a tough question to answer, and I can only give a partial answer. Okay, because I'd certainly defer to practitioners in this area in terms of their experience. I give you a partial answer, and that partial answer will come from when we talk about risk analysis. But it's going to come back to basically two things. First is, you're looking for similar products on the website. What do they have to do? But for innovative products, it's not going to be much help. The second, then it's risk analysis. What does your risk analysis look like? Where are you missing data? Because you may have to collect that data. Because otherwise, it's brutal if you don't have appropriate data for that. And we'll talk about why. All right, I'm bubbling up now, and I'm going to hit home a basic point here. I don't want people at the University of Toronto fanning out with aspirations of innovation who are still conducting themselves like technicians when they think about regulation. So let's talk about some examples. So here's the question. Here's a comment. It's a conversation in a company. I checked. Our new product concept is not regulated by the FDA. And so, in terms of regulation, and this gets a little confusing with terminology, health products are not regulated by Health Canada or the FDA, even though Health Canada is called Health Canada. Health Canada, the FDA, they regulate medical products. Okay? When we have a health product, that is not a medical product. So that's just a health and wellness product. These are not medical devices. They're not subject to medical oversight. So these companies then would think, hey, we're in the clear. I don't know what your experience is, but when I speak to startups, a lot of startups are more than happy to make sure their products are not medical devices because they're terrified of regulation. So here's your example of a company who thought that what they had was a health and wellness product, and they wouldn't be regulated by the FDA. So tanning beds changed in 2014, contact lenses changed in 1976, and e-cigarettes changed in 2016. This is being recorded, so I'm gonna phrase this as diplomatically as I can. Okay? If your product is not being regulated by the medical authority in question, I'm not gonna tell you what you should do in terms of your actions or your career. But I would suggest the following: whatever it is you decide to do it with knowledge, not ignorance. So analyze that risk, and if you privately determine, you know what, this really should be regulated by Health Canada, the FDA, then you decide what you and your company will do. That's outside my purview. I'm not going to comment on that. But what I will say is do it with knowledge, not with ignorance. So these companies then thought they had health and wellness products and found themselves regulated by a medical authority. Here's another example. And this is more plausible. I checked, and it said our risk class was X. Right? I've got a new device I'm bringing on the market. I asked the question, my students go through this all the time. I asked the question, what's the risk class of my product? Well, I checked the website. There was a similar product in class 2. Oh, I guess that means we're class 2 because our products are similar. Okay. But it assumes something. It assumes that the FDA is comfortable with how the product is currently regulated. The FDA can change its mind at any time, and they will, because their enabling legislation is protect public safety. It's not to promote innovation. Their number one concern is protecting public safety, as it should be. So they can change their mind. So how do you prepare yourself for that? Again, do your own work. Right? If you look at the FDA website and it says your product is class 2, but you do your own risk analysis, you say, you know what, something's not right here. We should really be class 3. So do it with knowledge. I'm not telling you, I'm not suggesting how you should conduct yourselves in your career. That's, again, it's not my purview. But whatever it is you decide to do, you should do it knowledgeably. So in this case then, let's go through the examples. We had metal hip replacements that went from class 2 to class 3. And this was a debacle at the time. Automated defibrillators from class 2 to class 3. And of course, glucose meters, this is a positive story, from class 3 to class 2. This doesn't happen very often, but it does happen. And these are major examples I have on the slide here. It makes a big difference to the cost structure of your product line if you're going to have a change in your risk class.
Excuse me, why glucose monitor changing to class 3 to class 2? What's the rationale?
Oh, I can't comment. I mean, I have to investigate that story. I could speculate, but I've learned not to speculate with this topic. Okay, so I could speculate, and that'd be an offline discussion. But simply put, we'd have to look into the details.
Is that because we want to become more kind of patient more accessible?
So if I can speak to this broadly without being specific,
Yeah.
What may have happened here is the technology improved, and the FDA became more comfortable with the risk profile of the product.
Mm-hmm.
Something we're not going to get into, but I guess I'll mention it now as well. Your risk class reflects the public usage. If someone is going to take your product and abuse it and injure themselves, that is part of your safety profile. It's up to you as a manufacturer to control that, not the public. So misuse, whether intentional or not, factors into your risk analysis. And that may be something else that's changing here too. Any number of things may be taking place here in terms of whether it's public education, usage of the product, the FDA's familiar comfort with the safety events over time, and improvements with technology that may manage safety events over time. So any of these things are possibilities.
No, I worked with Medtronic before. They had continuous glucose monitor system. So I guess, is that still under the class 3 or class 2 now?
I guess it will depend on the product line, but my understanding is for some glucose meters, there's been a lot of changes in technology here that you'd be more familiar with than myself, but some of them are now considered class 2.
As well. Yeah. Thank you.
I mean, and again, it sounds like you're close to this product line, but my understanding is there have been significant changes now in the technology for glucose meters. So it's going to depend on the product line potentially.
Yeah, I was talking about like 15 years ago.
Yeah, okay, well, fair enough. Yes, sir.
I have a question. So if you're doing a startup and you're going through the process of figuring out which class your device is, and you find that you've done your own analysis and you find that it should be class 3 when other existing devices are class 2. I'm imagining there's going to be a lot of pressure from the people who are investing to put it to the lower class.
Yeah.
So like how have you seen that, and how would you manage that?
I can't comment on that.
Okay.
Because no one is ever going to publicly articulate that's the case, first off. So the only way to ever be familiar with that is to be what we call an insider, right? You literally have to be an insider to the company to really know what's going on. So I dealt with a cross-section of companies. I don't have access to that kind of information. So it's not going to be publicly declared. So it becomes, I hate to say it, becomes a speculative discussion. We could talk about it, but it's a speculative discussion. Let's just say cost pressure is significant on companies. Now, I'm sorry, guys, let me just check here. Yeah, okay, we're a little bit behind schedule, sorry, and we'll adjust things accordingly. Okay, we're now moving to risk now. A couple more slides and then we'll break, guys, okay? So hazard analysis and failure mode. FMEA, how many people are heard or familiar with FMEA? Okay, a couple people. Yeah, okay, fair enough. Okay. So I don't want people to confuse these two, FMEA and hazard analysis. So I think, probably the clearest way of depicting the difference between them. With FMEA, you start with a specific design feature. And from that design feature, you begin to consider how it may fail and what the safety consequences would be if that design feature failed. Hazard analysis is different. I like hazard analysis because it doesn't assume we know anything. It starts with a health outcome, which may or may not be traceable to any specific design change. So I'll throw something out that's classic, like suicidal ideation or anxiety. It doesn't have to be these things, but those are things, suicidal ideation and anxiety are things we could read. Like anxiety, for example, with implantable cardioverter defibrillators, ICDs. I always tell my students, if you can say implantable cardioverter defibrillator rapidly 10 times, you don't need to write the final exam here. So ICDs can result in anxiety in patients. But that doesn't mean you can trace anxiety to a specific design choice within the ICD. So hazard analysis is really useful for uncertain situations. You know what the health outcomes are of the product, but you do not know how the features of the product generate those health outcomes. So hazard analysis is really good when we have sort of not a clear and explicit understanding how each feature of the product maps to a health outcome. So both analyses are certainly needed, but I like hazard analysis because of this somewhat agnostic nature in terms of cause and effect. Yes, sir.
So 2 questions for that. Does the FDA prefer hazard analysis in that case? And the second thing would be, how would you do do you have like specific outcomes and test?
We're gonna talk about it. Yeah, the FDA wants to see hazard analysis. We'll talk about it towards the end. It's not a perfect world, ladies and gentlemen. You know that. People want to see hazard analysis. We only have one problem. We don't have clear and explicit documentation on how to do it. Okay, that's the only problem we have. So I'm in the process of publishing a paper right now that's only taken 7 years of the cardiopulmonary bypass machine. We've spent a year on the hazard analysis, and I'll talk about that towards the end. So there are some citations given here at the bottom, but these citations you will find incomplete, and this will not give you a full picture of how to conduct this analysis. Because as crazy as it sounds, if you go to the peer-reviewed literature, the few articles you can find in hazard analysis are going to be qualitative and incomplete. Unless you find something I haven't seen. So hazard analysis, frequency times the severity gives us a hazard score. Okay? It's only taken me a couple of years to learn what I'm about to say. And here I'm going to say it now. This is complex. Okay? It's complex. Now, the severity is not such an issue because you can easily get severity from treatment guidelines and looking at the medical literature. So severity is not such a big deal. That's manageable. Frequency is the hard part. And that's where we're gonna do our in-class exercise. Okay, let's take a 10-minute break, guys, and then we'll talk about in-class exercise.